Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean. Today we have returning special guest Vincent, and what we're going to do for Vincent today is we're going to renew all the front brake components on his Lexus LX470. We're going to replace the brake calipers, we're going to replace the rotors, we're going to replace the brake pads, we're going to replace the front brake lines, and we're going to replace some of the other brake hardware like the anti-squeal shims, the pins, the retaining springs, and so forth. Before we get started, let's show you what Vincent bought for this job. Starting with the calipers, he decided to go to a AutoZone auto parts store that are basically rebuilt OEM calipers. So that's the part number for one side, and this is the part number for the other side. Here's the rotors he got for the job. They come from Australia, from DBA, Disc Brakes Australia. Okay. And that's the part number for the rotors. The brake pads come from Project MU, M-U. I don't see where the M is, but that's what Vincent tells me. And these are a brake pad known to people who race their cars. He's got racing brake pads for an LX470 that's never going to race. And he's got some StopTech steel braided brake lines. And I reckon StopTech is made by Centric, and that's the part number. And then he has a hardware kit for each caliper that comes with the two anti-squeal brake shims, the return springs, the retention spring for the caliper pins right here, and then these doohickeys that I've never seen before, but I will soon figure out exactly what they're for. And so this is all the parts. Now let's get out to the truck and get started with the job. Before we get going with the job, one thing I failed to say is a Lexus LX470 is nothing more than a fancy 100 series Land Cruiser. So everything we're showing you today would also work for a 100 series Land Cruiser. So now let's get out to the truck and get started with the job. For this job, you're going to want to remove the front skid plate because I really like jacking up the vehicle under this really beefy front cross member. There is a cross member behind it, but that's a little bit smaller, and I'd rather support the weight of the vehicle on this really heavy-duty front cross member rather than the smaller one behind it, because you might end up denting it. And in the rear, we have both of the rear wheels chalked and the parking brake set, so the vehicle can't go anywhere. We're going to get some jack stands in place on each frame rail, and then we're going to settle the weight of the truck on the jack stands. All right, we have the frame settled on 6-ton jack stands on both sides, and now we're going to get the wheels off. We're going to start on the passenger side. The first thing we need to do is get the brake caliper disconnected so we can pull the rotor and hub assembly off. What I've learned is if you turn the wheel one way or the other, it's going to give you better access. For the passenger side, if Vincent turns the steering wheel all the way to the left, that's going to open up more room to where we can get to the caliper bolts much easier. And then with the other side, we would turn the wheel all the way to the right to be able to get to the caliper bolts easier. So that's an optional step, but I do suggest you do it for the ease of getting to the bolts. And as you can see, look at all the additional room we have to work now. We're not working in a tight area back here near the sway bar. We've got all this extra room to work. To get the caliper free and out of the way, I want to disconnect this brake line bracket right here. It's a 12mm bolt, so I have the ability to swing the caliper way out of the way of where I'm working. I'm going to use my little 1/4-inch DeWalt gun with an extension to do that. I'm just going to put that bolt right back in there so I don't have to keep track of it. Now I'm going to get onto the two 17mm caliper bolts. There's one here, and then there's one up here. And I'm going to use my 3/8 DeWalt gun with a deep 17mm socket and see if I can get those out. And I was supporting the caliper while I was taking that second bolt out because it could just drop out on you. And then I'll just pull the caliper off the rotor. I have these caliper hooks. I'm going to hook it here, and then I'm going to just figure out where I can hang it to where I'm not putting any strain on the brake line. So what I'm hanging the caliper hook on is part of the automatic height control system that Vincent deleted from this vehicle. He no longer has the AHC system. And I actually have a video for that too. If you click on the link above, you can see that video of me deleting the AHC system on a buddy I used to work with at the fire department. I did it on his LX470. But Vincent took it a step further and removed a lot of the components that are along the frame rails, which I didn't do for my buddy at work. So now that we have the caliper off and hung out of the way, I'm gonna have Vincent turn the wheel back straight to where we can do the next step. The next thing we want to do is get these grease caps off. And you can see that there's signs that this has been removed before. So before Vincent bought this vehicle used, somebody obviously was in here, because you can see the damage that they did to the cap. And I'm going to try to get these caps off without damaging it any further. But Vincent did buy replacements of these, so it's really a non-issue if I damage it. But I really want to show you, you can get these things off without mangling them if you use the right succession of tools. So what I have here is a fine chisel that's part of an air hammer kit. I can't remember where I got this, but it has a very slim knife edge blade to it. This will be able to get in between the grease cap and this flange on the axle and hopefully not destroy it. I'll get my ball peen hammer and I'll just knock on it lightly. And I got a little separation already. I'll hit it in a few different spots. I'll turn it. And that's it. It's as easy as that. If you have the right tool, you're not going to mangle it. But the previous mechanic or owner used probably a screwdriver or something that was a little thicker, and it ended up damaging the grease cap. Next, we're going to remove this snap ring with a pair of snap ring pliers. You want to get the open end exposed at the top so you can easily get on there. I'll hook it and slide it off, just like that. Next, I'm going to loosen all these flange nuts. So now with the nuts backed off a little bit, I'm going to use a brass drift and I'm going to hammer and I'm going to try to shock the cone washers loose. I'm already seeing that the previous mechanic or owner forgot to put one of the cone washers in there, or they lost it. I don't have to do this one, but I'm going to do all the other 5. Those suckers are in there. This might take a while. I wasn't getting anywhere with this smaller brass drift, so I decided to just take the nuts and washers off and use a much bigger brass drift and a mini sledge and see if I could break these free. The whole point of keeping the nut on there is when you knock loose the cone washer, it could go flying out. So that's the risk I'm going to take, but I just wanted to get the nut out of the way to avoid striking the nut and potentially messing up the threads. So let's see how this goes. Okay, that finally worked. Okay, so that one's loose. It's just not popping out that much. I'm used to these cone washers coming out really easy, but it might just because there's a lot of dried grease and grit in there and it's not allowing the cone washer to easily slide off the stud. Yep, that one's loose. And you get the idea. I'm going to keep knocking these loose and then I'll come back. Now that I got them all loose, I'm going to pull out the cone washers with a pair of slip joint pliers. Just got to grab onto it and work it back and forth. There's just a lot of dirt on here stopping them from coming off, so that's what they look like. So I now have all of them off and I can remove this flange from the hub. I'm just going to tap on it a little bit in a couple spots to help release it from the hub. Just be careful and don't hit the threads of the studs. A better tool will be a brass hammer. I just don't feel like grabbing it right now. Got a little bit of movement. Vincent had this trim removal tool from Snap-on. Just gonna get it between the hub and the flange and start working it around. There we go. And the gasket came with it. So now with the flange off, I'm seeing some things that I don't necessarily like. I can see clear signs that the person who did this job last didn't have the proper size 54mm socket for these lock nuts and the adjuster nut behind it. because I could see where they took a screwdriver and they hammered on one edge of the nut to be able to tighten it. So I could say with 100% certainty it wasn't done right. And then you see the retaining washer. The proper way to do it is to bend one tab over the adjuster nut behind, and then you bend one tab on the lock nut in front. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend the tabs of the locking washer out of the way so I can get onto this with my 54mm socket. Okay, it looks like I've got all of the tabs out of the way, and now I can get onto this with the socket. This thing is really loose. I don't even have to get onto it with a ratchet. And then now with the lock nut out of the way, I can slide this locking washer off so you can see that one side was folded over the adjuster nut. So they did do that correctly. And now I'll get onto the adjusting nut and take that one off. And that one's hand tight too. So with these adjusting and lock nuts, they have a sort of rounded side and one side that is nice and machined flat. And with my experience, the flatter machined side goes up against the bearing and it's not flipped the other way around. So I found that they had this side against the washer, which goes against the bearing, and I don't think that's the right way to do it, because that's not what I saw when I did a similar job on my 85 4Runner. They were in the reverse orientation. So there's a washer in here that you can't really see because of all the grease. So I'll pull the hub off a little bit and then I'll get to that. So this is that tooth washer here. I'll clean it off so you can see it better. So you can see how it's keyed, so it slides into the slot on the axle. And then I can get the outer bearing off, and then I can slide the hub all the way off. Just like that. This is kind of interesting. This is the ring that the ABS sensor is taking a reading off of. So it's basically part of the hub assembly. Now that I have the hub off the vehicle, I have it in my garage and I'm supporting it on two 4x6 blocks of wood, because now what I want to do is replace the rotor. As you can see, I've got some tape over the bearing area, and that's to keep dirt and debris out of the bearing area, because we just got done replacing the wheel bearings and the races and repacking everything with grease. We didn't show it as part of this video because we thought some people might want to repack their wheel bearings or replace the wheel bearings and the races as part of this job, and then some won't want to do it. They just want to do a brake job. So we chose not to show it in this video, but if you want to see how to replace the wheel bearings and the races and repack them with grease, click on the link above and you can see that footage, so you can do that too as part of your brake job if you'd like to. So I'm going to use my DeWalt impact gun, about a 5-inch extension with a 17mm socket, and zip these out. What I'm going to try is a deep 17mm on these without the extension, because the extension robbed you of some of your power. So I got a deep 17mm. I got rid of the extension. Let's see how it goes. Yep, that's all I needed. That's something to learn. You lose a little bit of the power of your impact gun when you incorporate extensions. Okay, I'm just going to get all these bolts out. I've got all the bolts out. I put a couple rags down here to break the fall of the hub assembly coming out of the rotor. I have a dead blow hammer. It shouldn't cause any damage, and I'm going to try to direct the blows on the edge of the hub, not right on the seal. Getting anywhere? Yep, I'm making some progress. There it is. This is going to peel off my tape. I'll just put the tape right back there. So we've got the rotor off. It's up to you how much time you spend cleaning, but you can certainly spend some time and clean off this surface really nice. I'm just going to get in here with a brass brush and clean off all these surfaces where the rotor meets up with, and then we'll get the new rotor in place. We cleaned up the surface halfway decent. We didn't spend a ton of time on it. I would imagine if you got on here with a wire or brass wheel with a drill or a die grinder, you could get it cleaner, but time isn't on our side. We're trying to get this thing done. So we're gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on the surface here just so it will be easier for the rotor to come off in the future. Okay, you get the idea. I'm gonna keep on putting this on. I'm gonna slide the rotor over the hub, line up the holes. What we found when we did the last one, same with this one, it's not that tight of a fit. So you can twist this in relation to the hub and get the holes nice and lined up. We're gonna put a little anti-seize on these bolts too. And you get the idea. We're gonna get all 5 started with some anti-seize on the threads. We have the rotor and hub assembly secured in the bench vise with some soft jaws, because I'm going right up against the studs. So don't use any type of metal jaw that would mess up the threads. And it's not really that tight. I just have it snugged up. You're just trying to be able to create enough resistance to where you can torque the rotor bolts to spec. That spec is 54 foot-pounds. So I'm just gonna slowly snug them up in a crossing pattern, and then I'll get it to the spec. Okay, that hit, good, good. And then a thing that I like to do when I'm torquing multiple fasteners, after I do my crisscrossing pattern, I'm just gonna go in a circle and make sure that I didn't skip one of them. Okay, they're all torqued to 54 foot-pounds. Now we're ready to get the hub back onto the steering knuckle. I'm gonna prepare by putting some grease on all surfaces. So right in the back here, this is where the hub assembly interfaces with that back seal. So I'm gonna lubricate that so the seal will last longer. And then I'm just gonna lubricate all the other surfaces. And it's a really windy day here, making it really difficult for us to not get a bunch of grit where we don't want it. Frickin' wind is gnarly today. I'm gonna lubricate the splines of the CV axle too. All right, I'm not gonna waste any time. We're gonna grab the hub and slide it over. Okay, I've got the hub assembly. I'm gonna slide it over. And I'm just gonna leave it right there for right now. Now we gotta grab our outer bearing and we're gonna slide that in place. I'm sliding the outer bearing in. Now I'm going to install the claw washer. This has 2 distinct sides. One is flatter than the other side. This side is a little more rounded. I'm going to put this side towards the outer bearing. And remember, it's keyed, so you have to find the key in the hub spindle and slide it in place, just like that. Now I'm going to install the adjuster nut. The adjuster nut is just the first nut that goes against the claw washer and sets the bearing preload. These nuts, again, have a distinct flat side and a more rounded side. I'm gonna put the flat side towards the claw washer. And I'm just gonna run that in by hand all the way against the claw washer. That's snugged up, and now I gotta grab my 54mm socket and my torque wrench, and I'm gonna torque it to 43 foot-pounds. I have my torque wrench set to 43 foot-pounds, and I'm gonna tighten this up. Okay, that's at 43 foot-pounds. Now what I'm gonna do is turn the hub each way a few turns to try to settle the bearing. Okay, and then now I'm gonna come back in with the torque wrench and re-torque it to 43 foot-pounds. You see how that moved a little bit? So the bearing settled. I'm gonna try it one more time. I'm gonna do it a few turns each way, and I'm gonna re-torque it again, just for extra measure. Okay, I think I'm gonna do that a third time because it's still not fully seating. Okay, now that stayed pretty much right at the spec and I couldn't turn it. Now what I'm gonna do is loosen it to where I can spin it by hand. Okay, I could spin it by hand, and now the directions say to re-torque it to 57 inch-pounds. So I'm going to grab my inch-pound torque wrench, and that's a really light torque spec. Okay, that's it. Now what we have to do is grab our fish scale and see how much bearing preload we have. The suggested spec is 9.5 to 15 foot-pounds. So you grab your fish scale, you hook it on a stud that's about 12 o'clock. You pull the fish scale until the whole rotor assembly starts to move, and then check your value. And that's barely nothing. That only went to 5 foot-pounds, so we need a little bit more preload on that bearing. The preload isn't where I want it to be, so I'm going to tighten up the adjuster nut a little bit, and then I'm going to get back on my fish scale and check it out again. That's about 7 foot-pounds. I'm going to go a little higher. And after I tighten it each time, I'm going to turn it a little bit to settle the bearing in. Still about 7. You get the idea. I'm going to keep on working on this, and then we'll show you the final result of the preload we get. I kept on tightening the nut, spinning the assembly both ways a few times, and then kept checking it. It took several tightenings. I would just tighten it just a little bit and then recheck it. And now we have it right about 12. That's at least what it came out the last time we pulled on this. It came out to be about 11. I think we're going to go just a little bit tighter because the spec is 9.5 to 15. So we're going to go somewhere in the middle, right about 12. All right, I think I finally got it to where we want it at about 12 pounds of force. And it was 11 this time. It's in the ballpark, so I'm just going to call it good because sometimes I pull it, it's 12, sometimes I pull it's 11. I think we're happy with that. We're in the spec, and we're going to call that good. Now we're going to put a lock washer on there. Again, it's keyed. And then we're going to get our lock nut on here. Have the flat side facing the lock washer and spin that on. Now we're going to torque the lock nut to 47 foot-pounds. Okay. Now I'm going to get back on here with my fish scale and just double check our work. And technically I was showing you wrong. You're supposed to pull the fish scale in the direction the wheel spins, which it spins in both directions if you really think about it, because you can go in reverse, but let's just follow what they said and check it out. So that actually increased to 13 foot-pounds. I'm going to try that again. I'm going to give it a few spins. Started to move. Yeah, somewhere in between 12 and 13. So that's perfect. That's right in the middle of the spec. That's what we want. Now what we have to do is bend over the lock washer. One tab needs to go over the adjuster nut and another tab needs to go over the lock nut. So what you do is you find a tab that mates up with the flat side of each nut. So I can see that this tab right here is going to fold over the back adjuster nut really nicely. And then for the front one, this one's pretty close. I think I'll bend this one forward. You can see all these other ones, like right here, that's going to catch the corner. That's right on the corner, and that's also going to catch the corner. I think these two side by side are going to be the best ones. So I'm going to knock this one in over the adjuster nut. Just be careful of the studs here, don't damage them. Okay, that's folded over. And then now I'm just going to get in here and fold this one forward. There we go. That's better. Okay, that's folded over. It's good to go. We're going to get a new flange gasket installed, and it looks like these two that are close to ones next to it are the pin ones. There we go. Okay, that's in there. We're going to grab the new flange, and you can see the two alignment pins right here are going to align with those. Now we got to grab our cone washers, slide those in place. And then we'll follow that up with a flat washer. And then finally the nuts. I got all the nuts on and then I cinched them down snug with a short ratchet in a crossing pattern. Okay, they're all pretty snug. Now I'm going to transition to the torque wrench. The torque spec for the nuts that affix the flange to the hub is 24 foot-pounds. And what's going to end up happening is the rotor is going to spin on me, so I'll see if I can hold it firm with my hand. I don't think I'm going to be able to hold it. So what I'm going to do is going to get a couple lug nuts on here and then get a pry bar in between to hold it. I have the pry bar securing the assembly so I can torque them. Okay, that hit. That hit. Hit. Good. And then I'm going to have to reset and see if I can get this last one. I'm going to just try to hold it right there. Okay, they're all torqued to 24 foot-pounds. Now I'm going to get this snap ring installed on the end of the CV axle. If you don't see the snap ring groove visible, then that means that the CV axle needs to be pulled further in to the hub. I can see it, but I'm just going to pull on this a little more, make sure I can get it. Okay, I'm going to get my snap ring pliers and install it. Okay, we've got the snap ring in the groove, and then just to test, I'm going to pound on this and make sure that the CV axle can't pop inward. Okay, that's a good sign. So now we're going to grab our new dust cover and knock this in place. I think I'm going to put a little bit of grease on here to help with the insertion. There we go. All right, that's fully driven in. Now we're getting the ABS line reconnected where it needs to reconnect. The first connection is this bracket that goes to this other bracket that attaches to the steering knuckle. It's a 12mm bolt. I'm just going to tighten that by feel. No torque value. Okay, that's good. The next connection is right here. It's a 10mm. And again, I'm just going to tighten that by feel with a small ratchet. I said that wrong. It's actually a 12mm. And that's tight. Now we have to plug in the ABS sensor into the knuckle. I'm going to clean this off a little bit. This one is a 10mm. So I'm going to insert that. And again, I'm just going to tighten this by feel, no torque value. Now that we have the steering knuckle and hub assembly back on with the new rotors, we're ready to prep the replacement calipers with the steel braided brake lines and with the new pads and hardware. The first thing I'm going to do is attach the brake line to the caliper. With the OEM rubber brake lines, they have a pin here that only lets you get the brake line in the proper position, because with this line right here, we can rotate this around the whole 360 degrees. But by looking at how the OEM brake line attaches to the brake caliper, it's basically in this orientation with the line perpendicular to the caliper. So we're going to do our best to mimic that. These calipers came with their own brake line Banjo bolts, but we're going to use the ones that came with StopTech, because if you compare, the orifice that lets the fluid flow into the lines is bigger on the StopTech one. So we're both thinking that that's the better way to go. So you want to have a copper washer underneath the head of the bolt, slide it through the brake line, and then slide over another copper washer, and then get the thread started. Vincent had a good idea to leave this connection loose in case a little bit of tweaking is necessary to be able to get this bracket in place. It's better to just leave this thing loose, and then we'll torque it once the caliper is on the vehicle. And we're going to prep the other caliper the same way. Now we're going to work on getting the anti-squeal shims and the pads and the rest of the hardware attached to the brake caliper. For the anti-squeal shims, you're supposed to have two shims. One looks like this, and the other one has a bunch of slots in it. And because Vincent bought an aftermarket set of anti-squeal shims, they didn't come with a second slotted shim. If you have the OEM shims, I'll try to incorporate instructions on how to deal with those. these tabs right here fit into the caliper pistons. You have a bigger side and a smaller side because the caliper has a bigger piston and a smaller piston. You can really see it right here. You got a big piston here and a small one there. So Vincent and I test fitted these, and we believe it's best to get these in first so you don't inadvertently jam these tabs into your dust seals and tear them. And these shims are side dependent, so you gotta match it up to where you have the holes on the top and then you have the proper orientation of the different size caliper pistons. I have the small on this side, large on this side to match it up. I'm gonna hook it into the bore of the caliper piston. Now take a look at this. See how like this side is hanging up a little bit? And I can see how you can easily jam it into the boot. I'm gonna use a screwdriver to assist me to push it down a little bit. Get it started in there and give it a little more persuasion. There we go. And then this one popped out onto me a little bit. And basically like that. That's how you get it in. You want it completely flush to the caliper pistons. Now we'll get the other one installed. So again, I'll come in at an angle. I'll get the bottom hooks in, and then I'll utilize a screwdriver to help me get the top one in. This one's jamming into the boot. Good. A little bit of a pain on the butt. You got to be careful just not to jam your dust boots. Okay, that side's in good. This side's tight. Got to work at this one a little more to get it in. If you come in with a flat blade screwdriver, just be careful and push and try to get it fully seated. There it went. Just like that. Just be careful you don't jam your dust boot or you pierce the dust boot with the tabs of the anti-squeal shim. If you have the second slotted shim, that shim is going to go right up against the brake pad. Toyota recommends you coat both sides with a brake caliper grease. So you just smear it on both sides and then slap that slotted shim right up against the pad. But since we don't have it, we can't show you that. So then you come in with your brake pad and you're gonna engage the hooks down here. You're gonna engage those hooks into the pad in these areas. So I'm gonna slide it in. I'm gonna flip it over so I can see better what I'm doing. See how those clips are capturing the pad? So I'll flip it back over. And now I'm gonna do the same with this side. I slid the other one in and that one's captured by the clips. Now we have these pad retainer clips. And this is supposed to slip over the pad and both shims if you have an OEM 2 shim setup. And this little tab is gonna face the caliper body. So I'm gonna slide this over and I'm gonna do the same with the other side. Now we're ready to get our pins in. I like lubricating these with a little bit of caliper grease so the pads will slide on the pin freely and won't stick. So I'm just gonna put a light coat on it. I'm gonna get it started in the hole, and then the direction you put the pin in does matter. So you wanna come in from this side because the retaining clip for these pins goes in on the same side the brake line connects to. I'm gonna slide this in. A pair of needle nose pliers might help you adjust the pad to where you need to so you can get it aligned. I'm just gonna put a little bit more on this side because I lost some of it pushing it through. And I'm gonna put a little bit on this side too. Now I'm gonna push it through the other side and that one's in. One thing I forgot is these brake kits only come with one return spring, and it never made sense to me why they only give you one. So what we did is we harvested another one of these return springs from the old calipers, and it's supposed to go through the pin. So I'm going to pull this pin out. I'm going to insert the pin through the holes of the spring, and then these little tabs fit right into the holes of the caliper right here. Just like that. And now we'll get the other one installed. So I'll hook it in here first and then just push it in there, and then I'll get the pin in. So I have the pin slid through this side of the spring. I'm going to lubricate this with a little bit of grease Here we go. I'm gonna put a little more grease on there. Then I need to put a little bit on this side too. Okay, so we have both pads in with the anti-squeal shims, these return springs with the pins. Now we're gonna insert this retention clip. Each one of these pins has a little hole at the end. So I'm gonna rotate it. The hole's right there. I'm gonna feed it in. I'm gonna orient this pin to where it's facing the clip. I'm gonna slide that in. Okay, that's in. And then you put this right into the center here. Just like that. So now these pins can't slide out and your brakes will fail on you. This caliper is ready to go onto the vehicle. We're going to do all the same work on this one to get that one prepared. Now that we have the calipers prepped, we're going to get them on the vehicle. Our plan is to slide in the new caliper over the rotor and get it bolted up to the steering knuckle and torque it to spec. The torque spec for both of those caliper bolts is 90 foot-pounds. And then once we do that, we're going to turn the wheel back straight, and then we're going to disconnect this brake line right here and then quickly connect up the other one to lose minimal fluid. Because our grimy hands have been all over the rotors, and also because new rotors come with a protective spray on them so they don't rust, I cleaned off both sides of the rotor with brake cleaner and a clean rag, and now I'm going to slide the new caliper over. There we go. And then line up the holes and get them started. Okay, I got both those started and I'm just gonna run them in by hand. I'm first gonna snug up the bolts with my 1/2-inch ratchet and then transition to the torque wrench. Okay, those are both cinched up. I'm gonna use my big 1/2-inch torque wrench. Okay, they're both torqued to 90 foot-pounds. I decided to get the entire ABS line out of the way like we showed at the beginning of the video. I had it reinstalled, but I decided I would have more room to work. Take a look at how this Stop Tech brake line connects up to the bracket. It mimics the OEM design. I'm gonna get that bolt in there, lock that in. Now I'm just gonna cinch that up tight by feel. Okay, that's cinched up snug. I'm going to check the length and make sure I can make this connection above, and it looks like it's got plenty of length, so that's looking good. Now that we have the angle set between the brake caliper and this bracket, I'm going to torque this to spec. The torque spec is 22 foot-pounds. Oh, see, the freaking line is twisting on us. That's a little bit concerning. I don't want it to twist on us. So I'm going to try to hold this steady while I torque it. This is where the OEM line is superior because it has a pin that holds it in place. There it is. So just by using a little bit of counter pressure on the line, I was able to hold it steady while I got this to the torque spec. I'm going to break free the line with a flex head flare nut wrench. I don't recommend using open end wrenches for line fittings like this because you have a high chance of stripping them. But once you get it broken free, then you could transition to an open end because it will be quicker to reset the wrench. Okay, that's broken free. And I know I could turn it. So now that I know I could turn it easily, there's a retaining clip right here that I want to remove because once I get the line loose, I want to quickly be able to get the new line in. So I'm going to use a pry bar and I'm going to knock it out. There we go. Okay, I got it all the way loose. I'm going to drop the old one out and get the new one in. Okay, got the thread started. Right on. Okay, I'm going to get the line secured with the clip. Okay, I got it in there and I'm going to tap it in place. Now I'm going to cinch up the line. First going to do it with the open end wrench. And I'll do the final tightening with the flare nut wrench. How tight do you get it? I suggest good and tight.
Okay, Herr, good and tight.
And that's good and tight. Just wipe off the extra brake fluid. As you can see, we put a towel down here to catch any of the brake fluid dripping down. All right, that's one side done. We're going to do the same thing on the other side. We're not going to show it because that would be redundant. We got the other caliper installed. Now we need to bleed the brakes. We're going to start with the right front because that's furthest from the brake booster, and then we're going to do the left front or the driver's side. Vincent's going to turn the key into the on position to power up the brake booster. He's going to pump the pedal a few times and hold pressure. I'm going to open up the bleeder nipple over here. I have a clear tube running to a little catch bottle here, and I have a offset 10mm wrench. I'm going to crack open the fitting. Air and brake fluid are going to come out, and the pedal is going to sink to the floor on Vincent. He's going to hold it there. Then I'm going to close off the fitting, and then I'm going to let him know he can release and then pump up the pedal again and hold it for me. And we're just going to keep on doing that till I don't see any air bubbles coming into this tube, and then we'll jump to the other side. Okay, Vincent has got the key in the on position. He's going to pump the pedal about 5 times and hold, and then he's going to yell holding, which is my cue to crack open the line. We already did an initial round, and unfortunately I wasn't filming so you could see all the air bubbles coming out, but you just have to trust me that there was a bunch of air coming out. So we just topped off the brake booster because we don't want to drain that while we're doing this process because that's going to create more problems. So we topped it off, and now we're going to do a second round. Go ahead and pump it up. Holding. Pump it up again. 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 Holding. Okay, I'm not seeing any more bubbles come out, but let's do it one more time. Holding. Okay, you can release. So I didn't see any more bubbles coming out. We're done with this side. Now we're going to jump over to the driver's side. All right, we're done with the brake bleeding process. Now we're going to get the front wheels on, and we're going to torque the lug nuts to 85 foot-pounds, and then Vincent's going to take it for a test drive just to make sure everything's feeling good with the brakes, especially before he gets going at freeway speeds. So I would suggest going through residential streets, ideally with not a lot of little kids running around. Do a couple brake checks and just make sure the brakes are feeling good before you go out onto commercial streets in the freeway, where you're definitely going to want to make sure your brakes are working because you're going to be traveling at faster speeds. So we're going to get that done and then come back with the closing statement. All right, we are all done with this job. As you saw, it's a little bit involved to do a brake job on a 100 series Land Cruiser or an LX470 because you have to take the rotor and hub assembly off so you can remove the rotor. So it's a little bit more involved than some other Toyota and Lexus SUVs and trucks. While you're doing this job, this is the opportune time to replace wheel bearings or at least repack them. You can also replace the wheel bearing races. And while you're in there, you can remove the steering knuckle, you can reboot your CV axles, you can replace differential axle seals. There's a lot of things you can do while you're in that deep. And we actually did quite a bit of that. We rebooted his CV axles while we were in there. You can click on the link above if you want to watch that video. We did replace the wheel bearings and the races. And if you want to see that video, you can click on the link above. We also replaced the differential axle seals. So if you want to see that video, click on the link above. And as you saw for this video, we not only replaced the rotors, but we replaced the calipers, and then of course we replaced the brake pads and associated hardware. For a brake job, you don't have to renew the hardware. You can absolutely reuse the pins, the springs, the caliper pin retention springs, all of that hardware. Now, if you are in the rust belt where a lot of that stuff is all rusted away, then that's the time you probably want to replace all that. But Vincent replaced a lot of parts that were 100% reusable, and that's just the way he is. He likes new stuff, and that's perfectly fine. He could do whatever he wants with his truck. He could go drive it off the cliff right now if he freaking wants to. It's his truck. He could go catch it on fire if he wants. I don't care. It's his freaking truck. But anyways, there it is there. You just saw how you can do a complete brake job on your 100 series Land Cruiser or your Lexus LX470. With all that said, we thank you for watching Toyota Time with Timmy the Toolman and Sean and special guest Vincent. Thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, I really don't know what the hell you are waiting for. We are always coming up with lots of cool content, so don't miss out. Peace out. Happy wrenching. Bye-bye.